we look at the history of the relationship of the U.S. That started as a settler colonial, has a settler colonial history. It started on the genocide of indigenous peoples with the history of slavery. I don't think that the U.S. can maintain any relationship without it being a beneficial or exploitive one for them. I think everything that the U.S. does, of course, is with the intent of maintaining its hegemonic interests, including in on the continent. When we talk about AFRICOM, the essential spreading and evolution of AFRICOM in the last 10 years at least, um, is the result of that sort of keeping that same interest. It's not, it doesn't just act on its own. It acts in partnership with France, with Germany, with NATO powers. We've seen that as an example of Libya. So I don't personally think that the U.S. is, there can be a relationship that exists that is not exploitive. I think that the main priority should be to remove U.S. out of Africa. Let Africa determine its own self-determination. Let Africa speak for its own sovereignty. Let African nations determine that, struggle through that without the presence of the U.S., who is now they are using the French military and these other militaries to sort of come on the backs of whatever they're doing, sort of trying to seem like, hey, we're not France. I know you want the France out, but we're not France. And I think that people need to really understand those partnerships that are being made to spread U.S. hegemony on the continent for the purpose of the resources and etc. What was the second part of the question?
Now, how can the diaspora, members of the diaspora,
Yeah.
concretely express international solidarity?
I think the best way to concretely express solidarity is really understanding the connections. One of the things that the Black Alliance for Peace does, which I am a member of, that greatly, is make the connection that imperialism domestically and globally, they're counterparts. So imperialism does not just happen elsewhere, it happens here as well. So if we understand ourselves, I think you said it, Eugene, about the ideological struggle of dehumanization, the theory of eternal colonization. If we understand ourselves as an eternal colony, where our relationship with the larger society is socially and politically and economically stunted, if we see ourselves in that way, if we understand the occupation of police forces in the same way as AFRICOM or one of the other 11 military commands that the U.S. has split up the world in, that it's easier for us to understand our commonalities, our differences, and struggle towards self-sovereignty and struggle towards a united front against imperialism, not just abroad, but here as well. I think one of the things that people, because we are propagandized, again, we are colonized. I strongly believe in that sort of internal colony premise. We are propagandized so thoroughly that dehumanization makes sense to us. Like, people are they see those commercials to feed the African child, and so anything said about Africa as a continent sticks because we've already been sort of programmed year after year after year to look at Africa a certain way, until Wakanda, of course. But then, but then that happens, and then we look at Africa in another way, equally as exploitive, right? We're not looking for we're not talking about imperialism or self-sovereignty. We are talking about how can we get Africa to benefit us. How can we make Africa become a Wakanda here? How can we make our inner cities become Wakanda? But it's not anything that's a concrete sort of relationship that really speaks to the stronghold. What's keeping us down. It's not really explaining imperialism. It's not really explaining the colonial project. It's not really explaining those sort of commonalities that we see. And I think without that sort of understanding, without that basic explanation, without the breakdown that imperialism is not just something that happens to others, it's also happening to us, then the disconnect and the concrete sort of solidarity won't be there. But I think that as long as we continue to make those strides and making those connections more palatable, more understandable for like the everyday person, who is seeing these things that are existing. They are seeing what's happening in Burkina Faso on the news and these little blips, and they don't understand it, but they do understand their own uprising. They do understand 2020 and George Floyd enough to understand what NSARS was about. So when we look at those sort of interconnecting ways that we are showing up for each other because of those basic connections that are being made, I think that that's how we produce more concrete solutions.
To kind of go in line with what Hossein Kara was talking about, in that we need to clean up our mess together before we even think about conversing with other groups. So to Erica, I'm curious. Kwame Nkrumah makes this argument in Class Struggle in Africa that we have two classes. We've got the compradorial class and the bourgeoisie, and then we have like the working people within Africa. When colonization came and Europeans came to exploit and colonize the continent, the main struggle and the primary struggle at the time was anti-colonial, right? So we had people fighting to just get the imperialists out of Africa. But then like that left a whole slew of other issues because they overlooked the indigenous reactionary exploiter at the time, the people who arbitrate and allow for these issues when it relates to debt, as it relates to any form of exploitation or capitalism. So I'm curious, like from our perspective, how do we keep class struggle at the like core of what we do, whether that is in cleaning up our mess? It's very easy to go any other route. So I'm curious.
Yeah. So I'm just reminded of like Kwame Ture when he talks about in Africa, the petty bourgeoisie is the most like he uses terms, but like they really are like the worst in Africa. They're driving around in BMWs while the people are poor. So he says that our struggle against the petty bourgeois, the bourgeoisie, or even here, like the comprador class, or even here, what we refer to as the black misleadership class, should be ruthless. It should be a continuous, ongoing fight that we should just never give up on. I think the things that we see, especially here in the U.S., is like rooting for everybody black, right? Where we just sort of make this generalization about based on race, and we don't look at the different class dynamics or who and what is in place to keep us or keep certain people in the positions that they are. A lot of seat at the table conversation sort of negates that sort of neo-colonial comprador class that exists. I think the racial strike, the racial strike that we face, fighting against racism, et cetera, sort of disentangles or disillusions people about the class fight and what that actually looks like. So what does it mean to have a Mayor Bowser in D.C. when the majority of Black D.C. is poor, housing is in shambles, et cetera? What does it mean to have Eric Adams, in New York? What does it mean to have London Breed in the Bay Area? We're seeing all of these sort of new leadership roles, like Linda Thompson Greenfield in her role in the UN, or Lloyd Austin in his role. We're seeing all these black faces without really recognizing or understanding that sort of class dynamics, who these people even if they are not in that particular class, they do see themselves as class traders. They want to be in that class, so they would do what it takes, to maintain that sort of class position or to appease the ruling class, especially the thing that we talk about with celebrities, especially Black celebrities. One of the things that I always try to emphasize is that celebrity class as a class of people, white, Black, or other, is right wing, because the class of celebrity, Hollywood, the infrastructure of Hollywood is a right wing structure. So anybody entering into the celebrity class or entering into Hollywood and wants to maintain those positions are going to lean to the right, because they have to appease, they are coming of that sort of, not even so much of appeasing, but they are the buffers of the ruling class. They are the stop before. So anything that any of our grievances that we may have, if we look at what was happening in COVID, and the worker strike that was going to happen, and LeBron James was behind it, and then Obama got on the phone with LeBron and shut that down. No more strike, right? So we have to understand that these people are a buffer class. They have a certain position that is to sort of dilute our grievances, misdirect our grievances, even shut them down completely, so that they don't ever affect their bottom line, which is always, adhering to the ruling class. So when we have to really understand these sort of class dynamics, because they don't just play here, they play elsewhere. We see that we see the comprador class and what that results in Africa. We see that with the comprador class and what that results in the Caribbean. I mean, CARICOM is really a mess, but so is the African Union. So these are things that we really need to. So is the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus here. So these are things that we really need to assess, and we always need to keep the class struggle at the forefront of these of our issues and our priorities.
Yes, absolutely.